Hey everybody, Don Abernathy here. First, let me thank everybody for their continued support for the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your new favorite World War II based podcast. I'm happy to announce that we are now available on the Stitcher podcast app. So if you have Stitcher on your cell phone or your tablet, you can simply find us by searching WTSP or What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. As our longtime listeners know, we changed our podcast distribution provider. But unfortunately, all the episodes that were uploaded originally with our previous provider are not showing up in Stitcher. And we feel it's very important to allow our entire audience to have access to all of our shows, especially those with our interviews with those who were there, our veterans and people who lived through the war. Therefore, if you see your playlist populating with a show that has the abbreviation in the description of SRP, meaning Stitcher Republished, simply keep in mind that these are our original episodes that you've heard in the past, but we have simply republished them to make them available to our entire audience. Feel free to listen to them again, or wait for the latest episode to come out every Sunday. Thanks so much, and on to the show. The 24th Corps was activated at Fort Schaffner, Hawaii on April 8, 1944. From October 17th through December 26th of 1944, the 24th Corps participated in the invasion of Lafayette in the Philippine Islands, with the 7th Infantry Division and the 96th Infantry Division, along with the Filipino guerrillas under the command of General Douglas MacArthur. The operation, codenamed King II, launched the Philippines campaign of 1944 to 1945 for the recapture and liberation of the entire Philippine archipelago and to end almost 3 years of Japanese occupation. During the campaign on Lafayette, with the assistance from the Filipino Regular and Constable Forces of the Philippine Commonwealth Army and the Philippine Constabulary Military Units, the 77th Infantry Division came under control of the 24th Corps. From April 1st to June 30th of 1945, the 24th Corps and its divisions participated in the invasion of Okinawa. In September 1945, after the surrender of Japan, the 24th Corps moved to Korea, where it remained on occupational duty until its inactivation on the 25th of January, 1949. Hello everybody, and welcome to the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. I am your host, Don Abernathy, and sitting in with me today is my silent co-host, Sammy, the African Grey. So if you hear a chirp or a chatter in the background, it's probably her. So I'm very excited to announce that this week's episode will have our first interview with a World War II vet. Something I want to point out about these interviews you will hear on today's episode and in the future, to make the interview more palatable to our veterans and to make it as least difficult as possible. More often than not, I will go to them with a mobile studio set up in their house or in their preferred location and interview them there. So you will notice the sound quality will be a little different. You'll probably hear some background noise. But these guys are gracious enough to give me some of their time. I want to make it as easy as possible on them, and with some of them, mobility will be an issue. So please just take that into consideration when you enjoy our interviews with our vets. We got to go mobile to help these guys out. Last week, you heard Mike and I talking about our experience training with World War II armor. I would like to invite you all to go to YouTube, check out the channel Military Collectors. From what I understand, they're supposed to air these episodes on the Pursuit channel, which is a channel on DirecTV and Dish Network. They were supposed to air back in December. I don't know if it got pushed a little bit or not. But anyhow, go on YouTube, look for the Military Collectors channel. Season 2, Episode 1, we filmed out at Craigie's farm. The interview, the great Rabbi Rob, talked to him about all his equipment, all his tanks, his jeeps, his half-tracks, all his other hardware. But in the opening scenes of the show, you will see myself and a few of my friends doing a little skirmish reenactment. I'm easy to find. I'm the tall guy whose helmet falls off when I go to pull my fallen comrade by his suspenders. Check out Military Collectors on YouTube and subscribe. Got a lot of interesting stuff on there. And before we get on with the interview, I just want to do a little, let's call it World War II news. I think we may have our first contestant for Dick of the Year, Sammy. This is from the New York Post. Headline states, historian pleads guilty to stealing World War II dog tags. So check this out. Baltimore, Maryland. A French historian pled guilty Thursday to stealing dog tags and numerous other documents of U.S. servicemen whose planes crashed during World War II. Anton de Hayes, a 33-year-old author whose historical research focused largely on events at the French beaches of Normandy, where President Dwight D. Eisenhower troops launched the D-Day invasion, pled guilty to theft of government properties from the National Archives and Record Administrations. Between December of 2012 and June of 2017, de Hayes visited a public research room at the National Archives at College Park, Maryland, and stole at least 291 dog tags and 134 records, including personal letters, photographs, and small pieces of U.S. aircrafts downed during the war, the U.S. Attorney Office in Maryland said in a statement. Prosecutors say that de Hayes sold a majority of these items on eBay and elsewhere. Court documents show that he tried to lure one prospective buyer with gritty details of the airmen's dog tags, saying some were burnt or showed stains of fuel and blood, describing them as very powerful items that witnessed violence of the crash. This guy is a dick. If you want to read the rest of the story, find it on our Facebook page at the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. The fact that they're calling him a historian really pisses me off, because the purpose of a historian, and there goes Sammy in flight. So Sammy didn't want to sit on her perch very long. The purpose of a historian is to contribute items to the National Archives, not to steal them, and to sell them on eBay and to make a profit. This is insane. This guy is disgusting. It'll be interesting to see what happens to him as far when his court dates come. I mean, let's be honest. This guy is a dick. He's a douchebag. Your role, your job, your principal mission as a historian is to dig up facts, to lay them out in a palatable way, and to submit them to the National Archives. Not to go down the National Archives and steal shit so you can make a quick buck off of our veterans' history. I don't know if this guy was here on a work visa, if he's part of, how he got here or why he's even here. But send this dick back home, and please, no one buy his effing books. So yeah, there is the number one contender in this year's 2018 Dick of the Year award. It'd be really hard to beat this guy, but, humans do horrible things. So, Anton de Hayes, you're a dick, and I hope they throw the book at you, and you make the entire historian community look bad. I hope you're proud of yourself. Not that you give a damn. But, so that's a quick little snippet in World War II news. I saw that online a few days ago, and it really, pissed me off. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. Don't buy this guy's books. And, now Sammy's a little settled down, and we're ready to go for this interview. So please enjoy this interview with the great Martin Elekes. Hey everybody, welcome to the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. I'm your host, Don Abernathy, and today I'm very honored to be joined by a World War II vet, Mr. Martin Elekes. Thank you, Martin, for allowing me to come over to your house today and spend a Sunday with you.
You're welcome.
So let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Farmington, West Virginia.
What was Farmington, West Virginia like back in the late 30s, early 40s?
Well, it was a small merchant center, surrounded by about half a dozen coal mines. And that's what drove the economy.
So was your family coal miners?
Yes. My dad was a coal miner ever since he was 16 years old.
Yeah, I come from a family of coal miners from eastern Kentucky. That's where my grandfather was working before he joined the war.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you were on Pearl Harbor, when Pearl Harbor happened?
I was cleaning windows in the house,
really?
Outside on a ladder, cleaning my mother sent me out to clean windows.
How old were you on that day?
Well, God, let me see. I really can't recall, but I was...
Had you already graduated high school?
Oh, no.
Okay,
no.
So you were still in high school?
No, I was still a teenager.
So you're probably 15, 16?
Probably, my guess, in freshman or sophomore in high school.
Now, were you, did you enlist, or were you drafted into the Army?
No, I was drafted.
What year were you drafted?
45.
45?
Yeah.
Do you remember the day you left for boot camp?
Not really. Nobody paid that much attention.
Did you go by train?
Yeah. All I did is the draft board. You had to report to the draft board, and they give you some instructions of where to go. I was supposed to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Okay.
And they give you a train ticket, and so I had somebody drop me off at Fairmont, which was the closest city. Actually, Farmington was a suburb of Fairmont.
Was this your first time experiencing a train ride, or had you been on trains before?
I had been on trains a couple of times, and of course, whenever I grew up, there was a streetcar type of thing, and that used the same rails as the train did. So, no, that was probably one of the first times I'd been on any extended train ride. Yeah.
I can imagine as you're sitting on this train and you're heading out to boot camp, you probably had all sorts of emotions going through your head. I mean, one, you're on this new adventure.
Right.
But two, you knew you were going off to war, because this is 1945 at this point.
Right.
American involvement had been since August of '42 when the Marines landed in Guadalcanal.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm sure you had seen some newsreels, so I'm sure your emotions were probably all over the place at that point.
Well, I was sort of looking forward to it in a way, because I was that town I grew up in was like a big park. Everybody knew everybody.
Sure.
They even knew the dogs and cats' names. So it was like I say, it was a very shielded type of growing up experience. You had very little contact with the outer world type of thing. So
you pretty much couldn't do anything in your town without everybody knowing
what
you're doing.
Right. Oh no. Well, actually, if I remember when I was, like 10 or 11, walking downtown, and the neighbors would send me home. You don't belong here.
Martin, your dad's looking for you.
But so that was the kind of community it was. They sort of looked out after each other and kept you sort of honest,
So you arrived at Fort Knox for basic training.
Yes.
I'm assuming obviously you went through the training, and then at some point near the end of the training you get assigned to what you're going to be doing, correct? Or is it earlier on so you can train on it?
Well, what they did is it was a sort of a general type of a training type of thing, Army training.
Sure.
And where you did the bivouac and
rifle drilling.
And rifle drillings of several types of drilling and stuff like that. And then they sent us to Pittsburgh, California, and that's where we got some additional training, which is, if I recall, it's just south of San Francisco or in Oakland area.
Now, at a certain point, you became assigned to the artillery.
Yeah, at Pittsburgh.
Okay, and that's where you got all your artillery training.
Yeah, Pittsburgh, California.
What gun did you man?
Well, we had two different guns that we had to be proficient at. Actually, three really. One was a 50 caliber machine gun. You had to be able to manage that. And we had the 105 howitzers and the 155 howitzers, and you had to have training on all those. And they were, the 55s and 105s were very similar. It's just a bigger
bore.
Yeah.
What was your key role? Were you the loader? Were you the ammo carrier?
They put you on everything.
Yeah, you got to pretty much learn everything in case something happens.
You had to learn everything.
What was your preferred role? Probably the one with the least amount of activity, I would assume.
Well, the best role was sort of the lanyard part. Firing the lanyard on the gun was easiest and
less heavy lifting,
the most fun, because most of it was passing shells and stoking the howitzers, and that type of thing.
Now, when it came to aiming the howitzer, obviously, I'm sure there was some math, some skill, and some map reading involved. You had a forward observer calling in.
Right. Either that
fire.
Or they either had forward observers, or they had some light planes, like Cub planes, that were actually they were canvas. They weren't even metal, just light planes.
Was the aiming operations, the targeting itself on the howitzer? I mean, how did you guys figure out the adjustments? I mean, obviously there's levers to adjust the vertical, the horizontal.
Right.
Did it take a while to get proficient at sighting that in? Were some guys better than others? Or was the machine pretty much so well manufactured and designed that it kind of came easy?
No, it was fairly easy because they called back. If you were to the left 50 yards or short or something like that, they called it back, and you made the adjustments, and like I say, they had almost, I can't remember what they called the thing on the howitzer. It was almost like a compass thing that you could adjust so that you could go left, right, this type of thing. So.
After boot camp, what division were you assigned to? What was your final home?
It was the 7th Division, 24th Corps.
Okay. And you finally shipped out to go overseas. Where was your first station?
Well, like I say, I think most of the war was pretty much over. By that time, I think we ended up in the Marianas.
Okay.
And I think we, from the Marianas, I think they were, I can't remember whether they told me they were in the Kwajaleins or something, then in the Marianas. And then when the war was over from the Marianas, they went into Korea.
Now, when they shipped you off from California,
yeah.
Were you on a Liberty ship? Were you on a troop transport ship?
No, it was a Liberty ship. No, it was a Liberty ship.
From what I understand, now obviously this is later in the war, so perhaps maybe the troop level on that ship was less than what it was in the early stages, but from what I understand, the living conditions on there were quite cramped, quite sweaty.
Oh, no, the ship was filled.
Yeah, was it?
Yeah, ship was filled.
Did you spend most of your time down below, or did you try to get as much fresh air?
Well, to be truthful with you, what we did was we sat down under the deck and played poker most of the time.
How'd you do?
Pretty good, really.
You held your own?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah.
Take everybody's money?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Do you remember vaguely how long that trip was from California to the Marianas?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember. It was quite a while though, because they called them tin cans, and they didn't move very fast.
Well, and also from what I understand, you had to zigzag to kind of avoid.
Oh yeah, like I said,
the submarines.
They had their own way of getting there and doing things. Yeah.
Now, while you're on the transport, obviously you played a lot of poker. At that point, did the Army kind of give up on finding busy work for you guys? Did you still do calisthenics, any training, or they just let you to your own devices?
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
they give you a bunk and 3 meals.
And that's it.
And the rest of it was up to you. And they did give you an Army blanket.
The old nice wool blanket.
Yeah.
Do you remember if you were on a lower bunk? Did you have to climb up? Were you on like the 4th, 5th one up?
No, there was, on this ship there was 3 bunks, and I was on the middle bunk.
Which means the guy above you was constantly stepping on you when he was trying to climb up.
Well, it wasn't all that bad. Really, like I say, usually, after your evening meal, things sort of settle down. People would, they'd climb up and go to sleep, and if you was interested in poker or something, you stayed up a little later and that type of thing. But there was, there was a curfew where everything had to shut down.
Sure, after dark, obviously you can't be lights on and smoking lamps out.
So there was a curfew, so that everybody had to turn in.
At any point during the transport out to your final destination, did you ever end up in any sort of trouble? Were you kind of did you like to have fun, or were you basically just kept your head down, mind your own, and went about your day?
No, like I say, it was the people that you were traveling with. You did basic with, and you did training in Pittsburgh, California with, so it was pretty friendly atmosphere. You knew people, first name type of thing, So there's a lot of camaraderie, because you knew these people quite a while.
And as you stated before, you're from such a small town, it was probably exciting to you to meet new guys and make new friends.
Oh yeah, like I say, that draft that I was in was mostly, as I remember it, from people in West Virginia, and a lot of them was from southern West Virginia, and they weren't really very sophisticated kids. We were all kids, and a lot of them weren't even graduates from high school, or they didn't have a degree or anything. So
just started working early to help support their families.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's at that time it was a different culture, than it is nowadays. A lot of people just didn't think high school education was that important, unless your parents was pushing you for a higher education,
Sure, I mean, because once you get to your early teens, you're basically part of the workforce. You needed to help around the house, whether you're on a farm or in the suburbs. You go out and do what you could do. And plus, you guys were at that point 45. The Depression was kind of wrapping up, but you guys had lived so long in an era, in a time with shortages and work shortages and unemployment.
Yeah. When I was a kid, you couldn't even get a job mowing the lawn.
Yeah.
And adults were doing it. No.
So at that point,
work was very scarce at that time.
Now, did that affect the coal mines then, or were the coal mines still going pretty strong?
Well, the coal mines were working, but they were a limited capacity, of how many people they could hire, and I suppose people gravitated from other parts of the state, into for jobs and stuff. So.
Now, at that point, were the coal mines still doing the whole company store stuff and company chits? And
that was almost the end of that era.
Yeah, because I remember my grandfather showed me some that he had remaining over. And for those of you who don't know how a lot of the coal mines work, especially in the late 1800s, is the company that owned the coal mine, they would pay you in what was called a company chit. It was basically script, and it looked like a coin, but it had some sort of hole in it that would basically assign it to that particular company.
Right.
And the rub is the only people who took this coin was the store that was owned by the company.
Right.
You lived in the housing that was owned by the company.
Right.
And so you're basically working in exchange for housing and living, and you really don't have an income to go outside of your town to buy goods and services, because that coin is not, it's basically like for younger kids from the 80s and 90s, it's kind of like going to putt-putt or an arcade, putting your money and getting the coins to play arcades, but you couldn't take those coins to other arcades because they weren't eligible there. And so you're kind of trapped. They basically owned your existence for a good, as far as your housing and food went. And so if you wanted to leave the area or go purchase other goods and services, you almost had to find an alternative form of employment. But seeing how you're in a big depression, as you said, you couldn't even get a job mowing the lawn.
Right.
And so it really made things harder, and that's what ended up leading to the big coal mine wars, the unionization of coal mines. Right. And as you said, at this point, that was kind of at the end of its lifespan.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a story of our own family. Of course, we owned that house in Farmington, and of course the Depression closed the mines down. So my dad didn't have a job, so he migrated to Youngstown, Ohio, and got a job in the steel mills there. And he worked the steel mills for a while. And then a job opened up in Ritchieville, Pennsylvania, which is a mining job, was his trade. So he went to Ritchieville, Pennsylvania, and we lived there for a while, a short time. And then the mines around Farmington started opening up. And so he got a job at Carolina, which was one of those mines that was a ring around Farmington. And but they would not hire you unless you lived in their house. So we had to rent our house out and so that we lived in a company house.
And so
we lived in that company house probably for 2 or 3 years, and then finally there was a sort of a war with a rebellion with the miners against the company's policy, and they had their own police force. The company did.
Kind of like the Pinkertons, but not the Pinkertons.
They rode on horseback and stuff. I remember that as a kid, and of course a lot of people attacked each other and had a lot of problems, and finally they settled it up, and we were able to move into our own house.
From what I understand, the history of the term redneck actually comes from the Union Wars in the early 1900s, because coal miners would come from other states to help fight, and how they distinguish themselves is they wear red bandanas around their neck, and then the local papers started referring to them as rednecks.
Right, and they called the police yellow dogs. The company police, they called them yellow dogs.
And so you guys are essentially forced to leave your home that's been in your family for a while. How many bedrooms was that house? Was it a farmhouse? Was it a suburban house?
No, it was in the city. It was a nice house. It's still there, as a matter of fact. Let's see. It had 1, 2, 3. It had 4 bedrooms.
And then I'm going to assume the company house you're forced to move into, those are just basic houses. I mean, they're by far, I would assume, no means any great stretch compared to what you guys had moved from.
Right. But they weren't bad houses, except there was no storage. Okay, the storage was for the kitchen and shower. It was a little cement trough thing that went out to the street. That was the storage. Now the toilet thing.
So there was no real indoor plumbing.
Right, and the toilet thing was just an outhouse, so that the storage was dishwater and that type of thing.
Believe it or not, I personally know what that's like. Growing up, I lived with my father during the school year, but during the summers I would live with my mother. And at certain stages of her life, depending on her relationship with her mother, she would either live in the trailer, because my grandmother owned 5 acres along the Ohio River in Kentucky. And at one end there was a trailer, a nice double wide. Down at the other end there was what they called the cabin, which was essentially cabin or shack that was built in the late 30s. It had no indoor plumbing and it had an outhouse. And so we would capture our water in a 35-gallon barrel hooked up to the downspout. Yeah. We would use that to pour bleach in it, use that to mop the floors.
Yeah, we did the same thing.
We would bathe in the Ohio River. Obviously, you'd have to go out to the outhouse at night, which is about 50 yards away, because obviously you don't want your outhouse anywhere near your living quarters.
Right.
And then we would have to go out to the store and bring water in. Mm. And the upgrade to that, when we lived in the trailer, we had a cistern. And a lot of young people nowadays, especially those who grew up in the city, have no idea what a cistern is, which is basically a hole in the ground. It's concrete lined.
Right.
And you would pay a water truck to come down and pay them by the load. And so when you grew up either in either of those two locations, even when you had the trailer with the indoor plumbing, when you're buying your water by the load, you were very, very cautious about water waste.
Oh, yeah. Very conservation,
So at this point, you're on the Liberty ship, you're heading over to the Marianas, and at a certain point you get there. What was your first impression when you got off the boat? Was it the heat? Was it the weather, the palm trees?
Oh, you loved the weather.
Well, at that point, do you remember what month you landed in there? Because I know since it's below the equator, our winter is their summers and vice versa.
Right. No, I really don't remember that much about it. Yeah.
And so, essentially, in the Marianas, you were telling me before, you guys were kind of basically, it's near the end of the war. You're kind of on cleanup duty and basically preventing any sort of, which at that point the Japanese were kind of done. There wasn't any real active efforts to recapture those areas, but you guys were essentially cleanup.
The war had moved west, and of course, in that interim, I think that's whenever they broke the code and had the big air-sea battle, and that really was, that was the end of the war, really. Even though the Japanese hadn't surrendered or anything, but basically that was it. They had no Navy left and the Air Force left. So.
But as we've come to learn over time, the Japanese soldier was fanatical, and their communications weren't that great. And so
Right.
even as some of them left, you had the guys who were kind of out in the jungle who didn't get the communications.
Oh no,
and
that
so
was
they were,
that was common.
yeah, they
That
were.
was common. They had no. That was even after the war was over, people got shot and killed. That was fairly common because, like I say, they were cut off. They had no communication.
They were in deep bunkers, and they were.
Like I say, these guys were very dedicated. I mean, they were suicidal, as a matter of fact, rather than to give up. So, because they were told the Americans would kill them anyway. So, if they surrendered, they'd get shot anyway. So they had very little to lose.
Yeah, the Empire of Japan did a great job of brainwashing not only their people, but the people they occupied. And one of the stories you hear is when we took over Okinawa, the Okinawan women were so terrified because they were told that the Americans were not only killers,
Right.
not only rapists, but cannibals.
Right.
And so there is stock footage, and you see it all the time, where these women were throwing their babies over the cliffs and then jumping off afterwards because they were so brainwashed
Right.
and terrified of what would allegedly happen to them after they were captured.
Yeah, that's very true. Like I say, it was like you say, the propaganda that they fed these people were amazing. That they could believe all of it. The soldiers
Sure.
and the kamikaze guys and stuff. Because, like I say, when they got in that plane, they were dead.
Yeah, there was no coming back.
Yeah.
I think the rule for them was to try to take out 10 men for your one life.
Right.
The scary thing is that's still kind of going on today in North Korea. If you watch some of these documentaries that come out of there, the brainwashing in North Korea, and I'll give an example. I was watching a documentary called Inside North Korea, and the film crew went over with an eye doctor. He was granted access because one of the most common maladies over there is cataracts because they're so malnourished.
Right.
Even the young kids have cataracts, and so his goal was to do 1,000 cataract surgeries, and I think over 10 days, so it's 100 a day. He's basically assembly lining them. And after their surgeries, they were showing all the North Koreans in this room. They all had their eye patches on. And he would bring them up one at a time and remove their eye patches. And here they are for the first time in years seeing. They didn't turn to him and thank him. They ran directly to the front of the room, unprovoked, not instructed, and they started praising the dear leader in the photo, him on the wall, because to them it was his power, it was his majesty that did the work, and not the doctor.
Yeah.
And they were shown inside the apartments. In the apartments, there's no photos of any of the family members. The only photos they can have on the wall is the dear leader and his family members. And they train, even to this day, they're convinced, they're told that any day the Americans are going to invade, and it's your job to repel them. And so that level of indoctrination is still going on in 2018.
Yeah. Well, it starts so young. That's the thing. It starts so young that you're impressionable, and it never changes, regardless of how much other information you get.
And that's why Hitler started with the Hitler Youth so young.
Oh, yeah.
He would literally get 12, 13, 14-year-old girls, impregnate them in any means that they saw necessary. Once the children were born, they were taken over by the government, and from day 0.5, they were indoctrinated all the way up until their time of service.
Yeah.
It's easy to indoctrinate people when they're impressionable, when they don't know anything else. When you're in the Marianas, were you doing a lot of fire missions, or was it a lot of sitting and waiting?
Oh, most of us sitting and wait. We had some fire missions, but they were far and few. Like I say, they were far and few between. I think by that time the war had moved west, out of all the islands in the Philippines and all that, so.
And so at a certain point, the Army thought it was best suited to take your resources and move you guys into South Korea,
right,
where the Japanese had occupied South Korea.
Right.
And I'm assuming at that point things kind of picked up for you, being actively involved in trying to drive out the Japanese at that point?
No, actually, we didn't go into Korea until the Japanese surrendered. Okay? And whenever we went into Korea, our first mission was to round up the Japanese soldiers and send them back home.
Disarm them?
Yeah, disarm them. Well, they disarmed themselves, really.
Sure.
but it's to get rid of the Japanese soldiers because the Koreans hated them.
Oh, absolutely.
They really hated them.
Along with the Chinese. They treated the Koreans the Chinese.
Yeah, they despised. Then the next mission was, after that, is to round up anybody that was a Japanese ancestry and ship them back to Japan.
So you're clearing out the whole country.
Yeah, so the Korean, whatever government the army established there, wanted those people out of there. And that's what most of our mission was, other than, they put you out in the field and trained you every once in a while and marched you and, to keep you in the combat shape,
So at this point, you essentially became a police force.
Well, we were occupation force. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we were. Yeah.
And how long were you stationed in Korea?
Well, let's see. I left there in. I think I left there in July. We left there in July '46, and so and I was discharged, and we went to. I think we went back to Pittsburgh, California, and then from there they discharged us. And
So when you came back on the return Liberty ship, you went back to California to
Right.
the first port.
right.
But
Yeah.
you weren't physically discharged until you took the train back to your home fort in Pittsburgh.
Right. Well, yeah, they discharged you from Pittsburgh,
Pittsburgh, California.
California.
And then you put the ruptured duck on your Class A uniform.
Yeah,
so
well,
I'm done.
the funny part about it, the only thing they gave you when they discharged you was when it was warm there, so they give you a khaki uniform
Mhm.
and a hat and change of underwear type of thing and a train ticket or money. You had the choice of either taking the fare or the ticket, and that was the end. They put you on the train, you were out. You were out.
When you returned home, how had things changed from when you left? Obviously, the depression was. I'm sure there's still people dealing with that, but at this point, the economy has picked up
Oh
substantially.
yeah, the economy was great there in that area. Coal mines were busy, and
Did the town look different at all? Was there a lot of
No.
construction, or
no,
no?
the town didn't change much at all. As a matter of fact, it hasn't changed much even today.
Really?
Yeah, but one of the things is nobody paid any attention to you like they do. They have big ceremonies or this type or that.
Well, at this point, it's a year and a
Yeah.
half later. you
Yeah,
know.
so nobody even paid that much attention to you, and the first thing you did is got the hell out of that uniform, put on some civvies.
When you got home, did you take advantage of the GI Bill? Did you go up to school?
Oh, no,
Did you
no,
go
I
back
did-
to the coal
no,
mines?
no,
Did you
no.
go back to? Did you ever finish washing your mom's windows?
Yes, I did, but no. My parents were big on education because they were migrants at 16, both of them.
Where did they migrate
From
from?
Hungary. From
Hungary.
And they had a good education system in Hungary at the time, but it stopped at the 8th grade,
Okay.
and so they were educated minded. So they tried to get all their kids to go to college, and so one of the first things that I did after I got discharged, and I started college in that September.
Where'd you go?
Well, I started at Fairmont State, which is a small teachers' college at the time, and because I wasn't sure how I would fare in college, and it was local, and I stayed at home, that type of thing, and turned out I did pretty well. So I transferred to the University of Miami in Florida, and that's where I graduated from in '51.
What did you major in?
I majored in psychology and physiology.
After you finished college, what was your first career move?
Well, the first thing I did was I had a year of GI Bill left, and so I enrolled in West Virginia University for a master's degree. And so I spent my first year after my undergrad at a university, and from there I was hired at the maximum security prison in Moundsville State Prison as a psychologist.
I can imagine that was an experience.
Yes.
I've known a few prison guards in my day. Luckily, you were not hands-on per se as far as that goes, but you probably, being in that major and having access to the type of people who were in prison for the multiple different things they've done,
Yeah.
to have a first-hand access to their thoughts and their patterns and I guess their justifications for doing the things they did, that was probably enlightening and scary as hell for you, I would imagine, to a certain extent.
It was an experience, and I kind of liked the job, but I run into some problems there. They give you an office inside the compound, so every time you went in and out, you were searched. Even the warden was.
Sure.
I mean, they had a cage, and you'd turn you around, and the guard would search you. And if you went from one part of the prison to the other, they searched you again. That type of thing. And I was a single guy, wasn't married, so you have your hormones just sort of cooking at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So you wanted a little freedom. And one of the perks of the job was that they would give you 3 meals a day there, and also an apartment, which was up on the 3rd floor of the prison. And so if you went out night clubbing and stuff and come in at midnight, they searched you and all this stuff, and they were very strict, the guards were, because they really controlled that prison, the guards did.
I'm sure that kind of affected your abilities, if you will, to bring a lady friend back home. Hey, come back to my prison with me. Let's have a few coffees.
What happened is you can tolerate that about a month.
Yeah.
And then I just rented a small apartment in Moundsville there, where the prison was. So that took care of that problem. And of course, whenever you went in there, I'd eat breakfast and usually lunch, but never dinner, because you never stayed there late. And so after a while, they didn't pay that much, because it was a state job. And whenever I filed my income tax, IRS come back on me because the state of West Virginia gave me they said they gave me 3 meals a day.
So they claimed you on their...
an apartment.
So they almost treated you like a dependent.
And all of this was taxable.
Wow.
So they took a lot of my salary. They took a lot of my salary in taxes, and so I thought, well, I need to move on. So I found a job up in Akron, Ohio.
Now, at some point, I believe you got into real estate. Is that correct?
Well, what happened is I shopped around for jobs and stuff, in my profession, and people were sort of reluctant to hire you for some reason, because it wasn't the kind of job that fit into anything.
Yeah.
And so the only 2 jobs that wanted to hire me, one was an insurance company called American Life, and the other one was the state of Ohio, because I had a pretty good statistical background because of the psychology, and they wanted to hire me as a statistician, the state of Ohio. And the problem with the state of Ohio, I think it was like $2,900 a year.
Wow.
And so the insurance, the guy that run the insurance company, he impressed me, and he says, And at the time, a successful doctor was making about $10,000 a year, and you could buy a car for under $2,000, type of thing. So he convinced me that I could make $10,000 a year if I worked. So I took that insurance job, and I stayed with that insurance job for probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. And
did you ever reach that 10 grand?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the job paid well. But then a job opened up at the health department. They had a regional office in Cuyahoga Falls, which is a suburb of Akron, and the job opened up I interviewed for it, and the guy that was getting promoted wanted a replacement so he could move on. So he looked at my credentials and he thought I would make a good epidemiologist. So they hired me as a communicable disease epidemiologist. And it was a great job. I loved the job. But and then once I got working with the state of Ohio, I stayed there until I retired. Not in that job, but
sure,
you got promoted and stuff. But that epidemiology job was a great job.
I don't think I've ever heard that phrase before.
Yeah. What you are is disease detective.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you had outbreaks of something, you'd go work on it and
try to figure out the source, patient zero, and all that stuff.
A lot of the stuff was, at the time, polio was rampant. We were still having typhoid outbreaks. A lot of food poisonings in hotels and motels and stuff like that. And once in a while you get an outbreak of measles or something.
Well, with the food poisoning and the hotels, I'm sure that's basically where the whole health department's interaction with, food handling policies and all that probably was born from that, because you guys discovered, hey, a lot of this is coming from unsanitary kitchens and improper food handling.
Right, yeah. Well, some of the biggest ones that I worked on was, one was a Sheraton Hotel in Cleveland, which was probably a AAA hotel at the time. It was a good hotel. And then one that always sticks in my mind is outside of Kent, Ohio. There was a restaurant that a woman ran that had a high reputation, statewide, and so the people, it was the Pennsylvania, God, I can't remember their title, had a conference there, at Kent, and they used this was a smorgasbord type of thing.
Okay, like a buffet?
Yeah, a buffet. And like I said, it had a big reputation. People from all over went to it. And of course, there was about 100 people attended this banquet thing, and 70 of them were sick, and some of them were serious and were hospitalized. So that's one that I remembered real well.
I'm sure that tarnished her reputation a bit.
Well, we closed the restaurant. We ended up closing the restaurant. It ended up involving a well, it got contaminated with the sewage. Yeah, so, like I said, I remember that one because it was big, and these people came all the way from Pennsylvania.
What year did you move down to Cape Coral?
1985. 1985.
Now,
That's when my family became an empty nest.
Okay.
And so I really what convinced me to I'd visited this place as vacation with my kids, Sanibel and Marco, on occasions. So I was familiar with the area. So when my kids finally left home, was all in college or working or doing something, I decided to come down. And what made me made up my mind to retire, because I was about 58 at the time, or 59, I can't remember, is that a couple of people that worked for me, was much younger, died on me. Staff people. And I thought, well, I better stop and enjoy life. I guess.
Yeah, I guess something like that would make you reevaluate your life a little bit more, and make you decide it's time to slow down.
Right.
Well, Martin, I appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out with us today.
Well, you're quite welcome.
And thanks for everybody for listening. My name's Donna Abernathy. I am your host, and for Martin Elekes, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you all next week.